Hi, David from MDA Demon here, and I'm joined by MDA Demon co-founder Maik, who's also a mid-stakes online pro. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much for having me here.
So we're going to look at a hand that's a really good example of how you can cost yourself a lot of EV if you're not taking a data-driven approach to bluff catching. So this hand was played between Ewan and Ben, or Ben Ababi as he's known online. It's a 5-10 cash game, and they're about 200 bigs effective. But with the bet sizes pre, it ends up being pretty close to a 100 big blind spot, which is nice because our data comes from online hands where stacks tend to be 100 bigs. So let's dive in. The action starts with Ewan calling an open from UTG with pocket eights, and Ben 3-bets with ace-10 off. It folds around, Ewan calls, and we get this 10-3-2 two-tone flop. Ewan checks, and Ben c-bets for about half pot. What's your thoughts so far?
The first thing we should do is assign the correct pre-flop ranges to both players. This is obviously not a standard scenario, as you would never see Ewan flat with pocket eights in position like in the where is he? UTG +2. And you would never see Ben 3-bet with ace-10 off either in a normal environment. So both players have super wide ranges here. And going forward, the way I would analyze the hand is just treat it as a button versus cutoff 3-bet pot scenario. Then the flop comes, 10-3-2. Ben is kind of somewhat crushing the range, or the board, I would say. He has all the overpairs in his range, like ace-10 off in his range, which is like a very driving factor here. And I assume that GTO just bets for 50%, 60% here with range. Yeah. That's kind of the strategy.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, what do you think of pocket eights as well in this spot facing the bet?
Yeah, if Ben bets like 60, 50% or something, then this is like a bet that is designed to put pocket eights, like all the middling pairs, pocket fours to pocket nines, into a rather uncomfortable scenario, which means they have probably close to 0 EV and are probably indifferent either way.
How about with a club?
With a club, you have a backdoor flush draw, so you're definitely always going to continue with those. After you're constructing your defense range with board pairs and the pocket pairs that contain a club, or like every hand essentially that contains a club, like ace queen off or something, then you're just throwing a little bit of the other pocket pairs in the range to fight a little bit back. But even then, you're probably not meeting MDF anyways. Yeah, pocket eights without a club here is just on the front.
Nice. So I'm going to go right into the MDA here. So if we said we consider this spot as something roughly like a button versus cutoff 3-bet pot, we can see that the flop c-bet from regs is like roughly balanced. So there's not much to exploit here. Is there anything that we can like look at from, for example, future streets to help with our flop decision?
So what we should ask ourselves is where the EV comes from kind of with pocket eights. And the idea is pretty simple in this case, which is we are calling the flop bet, and then afterwards we are just trying to check down. Any further bets that we are going to face will reduce our equity or like EV again to 0, which means what we are interested in is kind of the check down frequency after in position bets the flop.
Okay, yeah, so we can look at the double barrel frequency, and regs are actually double barreling a little bit less than GTO. And the other frequency we're interested in is the bet check bet, so when they reopen after checking the turn, and that frequency is roughly balanced as well. So all in all, we can sort of deduce that we're going to reach showdown a little bit more often than theory.
Yeah, in that case, I would just flat pocket eights, I guess, at a higher frequency. You can also make an argument to always call here because like naturally your EV should increase, although I would be a little bit careful here because like this board is like pretty good for the in-position player. I guess calling here is fine and continuing.
Yeah, seems fine. First played, Ewan does make the call. And we see this offsuit 7 on the turn. So kind of a brick. Ewan checks again. Ben thinks for a little bit. And we see him make this kind of large 2/3 pot bet. So what's your thoughts in Ewan's shoes facing this bet?
I mean, I kind of know the MDA, but like starting with GTO, there's not that much you can do. It's a spot where you have close to 0 EV again. You might choose to flat. It's probably not a blunder, but it's also like not really fun continuing in the hand. Kind of depends. Like it's the same thought process that you have on the flop. If you're calling this bet, you are hoping that in position is checking back the river at a higher frequency and maybe with a weaker range than he's supposed to do. That said, this board is pretty dynamic. And a lot of hands in Ben's bench have a lot of outs against pocket eights and can decide to value bet pretty easily once they catch up on the river. So I would just go the easy route here and fold, like even talking about like GTO, which brings us, I guess, to MDA, which we will see is kind of blunder, I guess.
So yeah, looking at the MDA on the turn, this is where things start to get a bit more interesting. You can see here that the range from regs is too strong, so they're under bluffing here. So this is definitely going to reduce our pool EV with pocket eights.
So talking from MDA, it's kind of an easy decision here to just let the hand go. We are not going to face a bet frequency at the frequency that GTO would triple barrel. But that said, like if we have a look at the bet check range construction, then we can see that the range is a little bit stronger than it should be. So even there, we are not capturing all the EV that we should have. So yeah, it's still like a pretty big blunder to continue here. Just talking about MDA.
Yeah, so I node locked this underbluff into a solver. So I made the solver bet a little bit less often with the high card bluffs, according to the MDA. And then we can see that the EV of calling with pocket eights actually goes from like around 0 EV to something like in this sim around negative 3.5 big blinds, which is something like 10% of the pot.
Yeah, 10% is kind of massive. Like what I'm usually interested in when I'm studying for myself, just studying GTO, is like I'm trying to avoid blunders that are around like 1% of the pot. Not really interested in anything that's blundering for a lower amount, at least not in more complicated scenarios that are going deeper into the tree, like for example, like turn and river decisions. And yeah, 10% is like a massive blunder here. Again, like it's not GTO blunder, so no worries there, but like looking at the MDA, definitely a hand that we should let go.
As played, Ewan makes the call. And the river brings an offsuit king. So obviously a great card for in position. Ewan with nothing to do here checks again. Ben thinks for a little, and then Ewan hears the words he didn't want to hear, which is Ben moving all in for about 1.3k. What's your thoughts here in Ewan's shoes?
Ben is absolutely crushing this board. With the king arriving on the river, like half of his bluffs improve to top pair now, which can obviously value bet. Ace-10 probably has a decision, which comes down to is Ewan calling such hands as he has. I guess also like Queen-10 suited, Jack-10 suited, or is he going to fold these? Talking about MDA, which we, I guess, will do shortly, I would always fold those hands on the river, because what we have to think about in Ben's shoes is how easy or how difficult is it to actually overbluff on this board. And I feel like even if you have aggressive opponents here, which I assume Ben certainly is, as he's like a high stakes regular, like even those people have trouble actually over bluffing this board, because again, like half of his bluffs improved, like for example, like ace king, king queen with the club, and then he has some bluffs left, ace queen, ace jack, queen jack with the club, I assume, which can fire again on the river. But actually over bluffing here is like super complicated and like really tough to do. You have to kind of get super creative. I'm not even sure if it's possible. And in such scenarios where it's actually like super difficult to actually over bluff, you have two subpopulations, like one subpopulation who always bluffs here, which doesn't gain you any EV. It just makes it so that this spot is getting bluffed at the right frequency. So pocket eights is kind of like a 0 EV call then on the river. And then you have the other subpopulation, which might choose to not always bluff, maybe not never bluff, but they will sometimes check back with a bluff, not realizing how strong the king is for the range. And the whole spot afterwards will kind of look under bluff, looking at both subpopulations together. So if you're in a spot where you can't really actually over bluff, I would never ever look to bluff catch light here. And with Ben actually value betting ace-10 here, he's kind of saying Ewan isn't aware of that concept and will bluff catch more often than he should. Because like even Ewan could elect to just call down with ace-10 plus here.
Yeah, and then if we actually look at the MDA, we can see that the triple barrel is generally underbluffed by regs. And then also if we look at like the specific texture, so the Broadway overcard on the river, then we just see the trend is even more drastic. So regs are finding even fewer bluffs here. As played, Ewan makes the call and sees the bad news. So this is a great example of how we can refine our bluff catching using mass data and avoid leveraging ourselves into costly mistakes on the river. Thanks for watching, and thanks for joining me today, Maik.
Thank you very much for having me.